On August 1st, 2025, 5 teenagers turned a movie theater parking lot in Simi Valley, California, into the scene of a hate crime. They filmed everything. Mikhail Robinson, a young black man, was chased, surrounded, and brutally beaten as he tried to escape. The attackers repeatedly punched his face. They broke his teeth. They shouted racial slurs while recording every second of the humiliation. The camera captured everything: the victim's despair, the gratuitous violence, the coldness of the aggressors who turned a crime into entertainment for their social media. And do you know what the punishment was? Between 210 and 240 days in a juvenile facility, followed by electronic monitoring at home. Oh, and mandatory participation in something called a healing circle. That's right, a meditation and conversation program for teenagers who broke someone's teeth because of their skin color. The media blamed the lenient judge. Social media exploded against the spoiled teenagers. Everyone cried out for justice. But no one asked the right question. No one asked who benefits when violent criminals are kept on the streets instead of being sent to prison. The answer will shock you. Because it's not just 5 teenagers. It's a multi-million-dollar industry that needs abusers at large to keep making money. It's a system that turns victims like Michael Robinson into fuel for government contracts, federal funds, and the salaries of cure specialists. Today, you're going to discover what's really at the top of the pyramid. It's not the judge. It's not the teenagers. It's something much bigger, Marty Sinister, and something the mainstream media will never tell you, because they're also part of the scheme. If you want to understand how the system really works and discover the truth they're trying to erase, subscribe to the channel now. I'm Hendrix Cole, and I'm going to tell you what really happened to Michael Robinson and to the millions of dollars that should be protecting victims like him, but instead fuel a machine that needs criminals on the streets to keep operating. What you're about to see here isn't conspiracy theory. These are official documents, public contracts, budget reports that anyone can access, but that no one bothers to investigate. And there's a reason for that. When you connect the dots, the whole narrative falls apart. The case of Michael Robinson exposes something that happens across the country, but remains invisible because everyone is looking in the wrong place. While you're outraged by arrogant teenagers and progressive judges, a network of nonprofits, government programs, and restorative justice experts is raking in billions of dollars in their business model depends on one thing. Criminals need to keep committing crimes to justify the budget. I'll show you the exact numbers, the names of the organizations, the budget proposals where they ask for millions of dollars to rehabilitate offenders, and how these same programs classify racially motivated beatings as nonviolent crimes to keep the money flowing. Michael Robinson had his teeth broken. His abusers are at home wearing electronic ankle monitors, participating in healing circles. Meanwhile, organizations like Interface Children and Family Services are submitting proposals requesting over $1.3 million in the first year and nearly $6 million in the second to expand exactly this type of program. Coincidence? No, it's the business model. And it's time someone spoke about it without fear of being canceled or accused of being insensitive. Because who is really being insensitive are those who have turned the pain of real victims into opportunities for profit. Many people think that talking about a cure industry is an exaggeration. It sounds like a conspiracy theory until you start looking at the documents that were right in front of you the whole time and that everyone else ignored. The first clue isn't in some obscure blog or a conspiracy forum. It's in an official statement from the Ventura County District Attorney's Office itself, proudly announcing the Transforming Harm to Healing program as if it were the ultimate solution to youth violence. In this public material, they describe the program as a model of evidence-based restorative justice, aimed at young people between the ages of 12 and 21, in direct partnership with Interface Children and Family Services, a large regional NGO that operates justice and community rehabilitation services throughout the county. Now, notice a detail that almost no one mentions. While this program is presented to the public as a humanized way of dealing with young offenders, it is also described in technical reports and internal presentations as part of a broader strategy of deviation and alternative to incarceration, with clear targets for the number of young people served per year. In other words, it's not just about healing the damage, it's about feeding a constant stream of cases to keep the machine running. No one connected the dots, but the clue was there all along. in Interface Children and Family Services. On institutional presentation to the Juvenile Justice Committee, they state that they want to expand the Tier 2 and Tier 3 system capable of serving up to 1,450 young people per year with mediation, mentoring, restorative circles, and psychological support services, all funded with public money, program fees, and grants. This isn't a one-off charitable action. It's a planned pipeline with capacity, goals, and a detailed budget. Many people ignored it, but look at what's written when they talk about the budget. Year 1, approximately $1, $4 million. Year 2, approximately $1.6 million. A large part of this goes directly to salaries, benefits, operating costs, overhead costs, and program expenses, all packaged under the label of youth prevention and intervention. In simple terms, the more young people are referred to these programs, the more justification there is for maintaining and expanding this budget. And then comes the phrase that dismantles any in a comparison used in their own justification materials. They show that investing about $1,000 per young person per year in deviation programs is much cheaper than keeping that same young person in a juvenile facility where the daily cost exceeds $700. At first glance, it seems like a smart economy, but when you look at it from the industry's perspective, an uncomfortable question arises. If the money stops going to the traditional prison system and starts going to NGOs and community programs, who then has a direct interest in keeping this model alive? Another external clue that no one has connected with the Michael Robinson case is in California's Proposition 47 funding reports. These documents show that counties like Ventura receive millions to create and expand diversion, reentry, and community justice programs, often with organizations like Interface in the position of administrators or key partners. This is not speculation. The reports speak of more than $7 million in certain funding cycles, distributed among projects that have the stated goal of reducing incarceration and expanding community alternatives. Now put the pieces together. On one hand, official statements celebrating restorative justice programs. On the other, public reports detailing that millions of dollars are circulating precisely within these initiatives, always contingent on a constant flow of participants, young people in conflict with the law, people on probation, defendants in cases that can be diverted to alternative programs. It's like a production line. Without raw materials, the factory stops. And this isn't just the idea of an indignant Interface's own institutional material defines itself as the most comprehensive social services agency in the region, responsible for dozens of programs, including justice, reentry, and a 211 call center that serves hundreds of thousands of people annually, funded by foundations, donations, and multiple government sources. This shows that we are talking about a robust, professionalized structure with an administrative team, fundraising, service goals, and a presence in virtually all institutional spaces in the county. When you revisit Michael Robinson's case, knowing this, the story changes completely. The light sentence ceases to seem like just an isolated decision by a lenient judge and begins to sound like part of an ecosystem that systematically needs to push serious cases into the nonviolent or eligible for deviation categories to feed this network of programs. Remember the standard phrase that prison doesn't rehabilitate? In official documents, this discourse is accompanied by spreadsheets, service targets, and budget columns. The most sinister external clue is this convergence between moral narrative and cash flow. In institutional videos and public posts, there is talk of healing, reparation, and transforming harm into hope. In budget proposals, there is talk of annual service capacity, costs per young person, expansion of services, and continued funding. These are two languages describing the same structure for the public, compassion, for the budget committee numbers. When you see these two layers together, the question stops being, why weren't these 5 teenagers arrested? And becomes who objectively benefits when they aren't arrested. And then suddenly that seemingly innocent press release, that PDF presentation with tables and graphs, ceases to be tedious bureaucracy and becomes the map of a mechanism that transforms real violence into an opportunity for institutional expansion. And it is precisely when this mechanism begins to become clear that the next phase of the investigation becomes inevitable. To follow the money trail, line by line, within these very documents that they themselves publish, because it is in these numbers, in these comparisons between CU cost of incarceration and cost of diversion, which revealed the true logic of the system without mask. They follow along with me, because now it's no longer just an opinion. It's a document on the screen. Imagine you open your browser and type Ventura County District Attorney transforming harm to healing. The first result that appears is an official statement from the Ventura County District Attorney's Office, announcing this restorative justice program as a major evidence-based advancement for young offenders. There, in large letters, they explain that the goal is to transform harm into healing, reduce racial disparities, and offer an alternative to incarceration for young people aged 12 to 21, in partnership with the probation department and an NGO called Interface Children and Family Services. Sounds good, but wait until you see where we click next. I'm going to open the Interface Children and Family Services website right on their institutional page. They present themselves as the most comprehensive social services agency in the region, with over 30 programs distributed across areas such as mental health, domestic violence, youth in crises, human trafficking, and, of course, justice and reentry services. It's not a small volunteer group. It's a professional structure that serves tens of thousands of people a year, with a 211 call center that handles over 250,000 calls in various counties across California. So far, so good. The discourse is about social protection, but the money trail starts elsewhere. Now, look where I click a PDF presentation from Interface itself to the county's Juvenile Justice Committee. It's a technical slide deck, full lab graphs, bullet points, and tables. The title talks about county-wide expansion of deviance and prevention programs built on the success of something called the Lift Youth Partnership. From this point on, the language changes. It's no longer about cure or empathy, it's about pipeline. In the middle of the presentation, there's a section called County-Wide Need. There, the county police department estimates that, on average, 1,500 citations are issued to young people per year in Ventura County alone, excluding one city that has its own system. Of these, about 60% are considered eligible for diversion. In other words, almost 1,000 young people a year could be pushed into alternative programs, such as healing circles, instead of going into the traditional system. And guess who proposes to receive this mass of cases? Interface itself, with a Tier 2 and Tier 3 system. Scroll down a bit further in the document and you'll find the heart of the matter. Scope of work. There it is written, in black and white, that the annual goal, once the program is fully implemented, is to serve up to 500 young people in Tier 2 and up to 950 young people in Tier 3. These are not random numbers. It's the projected capacity of the system. Each young person is not just a case. They are a line in the service spreadsheet that justifies the program's existence. The contracts with the county, the maintenance of staff, supervisors, coordinators, psychologists, and the entire administrative chain. Now comes the tricky part. I'll scroll down to the budget section, down there in the budget request section. Two numbers appear that explain why so many powerful people defend this type of alternative justice so fiercely. Year 1, $1,393,726. Year 2, $1,599,238. And the document details everything. Over $900,000 in salaries and benefits in the first year, rising to over $1 million in the second. Hundreds of thousands in operating costs, program expenses, and a fixed 15% share for indirect costs such as rent, IT, insurance, equipment, and administration. Suddenly, the Q narrative gains another layer. It's also payroll. The presentation itself makes a direct comparison between investment per youth and the cost of incarceration. In one of the slides, they present a simple calculation, something around $1,000 per youth per year in the program versus approximately $716 per day to keep that youth in a county juvenile facility. The message is clear. From a financial standpoint, diverting as many youths as possible to community programs is smarter for the local budget. However, this savings doesn't fall from the sky. It comes with a choice. Whenever possible, classifying cases as eligible for diversion. Now consider the case of Michael Robinson in this light. The sentence for the teenagers who beat him included time in a juvenile facility, but also electronic monitoring and participation in restorative programs like transforming harm to healing. When you read the public statement about the case, It seems like just a balanced decision between punishment and rehabilitation. But with the interface PDF open beside you, you see something else. Each violent youth who escapes a long sentence and falls into a deviant alternative adds points to that goal of up to 950 served per year, helps maintain the program's success numbers, and most importantly, supports the narrative that this model deserves more investment. And it doesn't stop there. If you open the reports related to Proposition 47, which deals with state funding for diversion and reentry programs, you'll find Ventura County listed among the recipients of millions of dollars earmarked precisely for this type of initiative. In one of the local plan documents, Interface is described as an experienced administrative agency with a history of coordinating more than 10 organizations in a service consortium to reduce recidivism and support populations on parole. In other words, it's not just a contract. It's a central role in the entire alternatives to incarceration architecture of the county. When you put all these screens side by side, the pretty website talking about a healthy community, the statement from the public prosecutor's office extolling transforming harm to healing, the budget PDF with almost $3 million over 2 years, and the Proposition 47 report showing a continuous flow of resources into this ecosystem, the story ceases to be abstract. You can see in real time how the money circulates, how the goals are defined, how the financial logic favors any decision that pushes cases into the eligible for diversion category. And it is precisely at this point where the visual evidence begins to reveal a pattern, that the question arises that no one asks publicly. If this entire structure depends on a constant volume of young people in conflict with the law, what happens when the number of serious cases begins to fall, or when a crime is so shocking that, in theory, it would require an exemplary response from the system? Now that you've seen the numbers and followed the investigation document by document, it's time to compare who lost and who won in this story. Michael Robinson was chased, surrounded, beaten, and filmed while trying to escape 5 teenagers who shouted racial slurs. His teeth were broken. The video of his humiliation went viral. He didn't choose to be there. He didn't have the luxury of opting for healing circles. He was turned into an unwitting victim of a hate crime that all of society should consider unacceptable. Foxla, the perpetrators, they sat in a juvenile facility for a few months, returned home with electronic ankle monitors, and were referred to the Transforming Harm to Healing program. Their lives weren't destroyed. They didn't face consequences commensurate with the terror they caused. And ironically, they became part of a much more valuable statistic. They became participants in a restorative justice program that justifies millions of dollars in public contracts. Meanwhile, Interface Children and Family Services submitted a proposal to the County Juvenile Justice Committee requesting $1,393,726 in the first year and $1,599,238 in the second year. The organization, which describes itself as the most comprehensive social services agency in the region, operates 30 different programs, serves tens of thousands of people annually, and manages a 211 call center that receives over 250,000 calls across various California counties. It's not a charity office. It's a professional institutional machine with dozens of full-time employees, coordinators, supervisors, psychologists, administrative staff, office rentals, vehicles, IT equipment, and 15% of overhead costs embedded in the budget to cover it all. More than $900,000 in salaries and benefits in the first year alone. More than $1 million in the second. Hundreds of thousands in operating costs, program expenses, rent, insurance, vehicle maintenance, software, professional training, and client incentives. All of this funded with public money, including the more than $7 million Ventura County received from Proposition 47 funds, specifically earmarked for diversion and reentry programs. Interface is not merely a partner in this system. It is described in the documents as the experienced administrative agency, responsible for coordinating an entire consortium of organizations around this model. Think about it. While Michael Robinson was trying to recover physically and emotionally from a brutal, racially motivated attack, while grappling with the shame of being filmed helpless and beaten. The machine that put his attackers back on the streets in record time was expanding its infrastructure, requesting more funding, planning to serve up to 1,450 young people a year in 2-tiered diversion schemes, with growth targets, implementation timelines, and projected costs. There's nothing there about Michael. Nothing about victim reparations. Nothing about ensuring those teenagers actually changed. Just service numbers, costs per young person, and pipeline capacity. And there's more. While Michael Robinson suffered, Interface received institutional applause, public recognition, official partnerships with the district attorney's office, the probation department, local police, and school systems. They are present in every formalized space under one roof in the county. They work with the Conrad N. Hilton Foundation, receive donations from private foundations, raise federal and state funds, and are described as the critical safety net for families and children in the region. In other words, while the real victim is forgotten, the industry that protected the aggressors is celebrated as the community's savior. Now comes the part that makes you want to scream. Interface's own presentation compares the costs, approximately $1,000 per young person per year in their program versus $716 per day in a county juvenile facility. The argument is, look how much money we save, the government. But think about what this means in practice. Every time a violent case like Michael's is diverted to an alternative program, instead of resulting in a long prison sentence, Interface adds a client to its portfolio, adds another line of service, reinforces the narrative that the model works, and strengthens the argument to ask for even more money in the next funding cycle. The victim bleeds, the organization grows. And don't be fooled into thinking it's just an NGO trying to survive. Interface operates an annual budget in the millions, manages dozens of contracts, coordinates multiple funding sources including federal grants for youth violence prevention from the OJ, contracts with the county, partnerships with schools, and emergency funds linked to natural disasters. They have a fundraising department, an institutional development team, geographic expansion strategies, and a presence in 31 or even 40 counties in California, depending on the document. It's not an improvised response to tragedy. It's a highly structured operation that depends on the continued existence of youth in crisis, offenders, and program participants to keep the machine running. Meanwhile, Michael Robinson had to deal alone with the trauma, the public exposure, the fear of leaving home, the physical pain of broken teeth, and the anger of seeing his attackers walking freely through the same city, probably frequenting the same places, perhaps even laughing about the situation in the same social media groups where they posted the original video. And Interface. It is planning the next budget cycle, preparing new proposals, expanding partnerships with schools, renewing contracts with the county, and ensuring that in the coming years, more than 1,400 young people per year will go through its programs. The more cases like Michael's are diverted from the traditional system, the more success they can report. Do you think it's fair that an organization profits millions while the real victim of a filmed and brutal hate crime loses their dignity, safety, and teeth? Do you think it's right that perpetrators are transformed into institutional growth opportunities for NGOs that secure huge government contracts, while Michael Robinson receives nothing but newspaper headlines that quickly disappear? Comment below with the word justice if you are also outraged by what I have shown you so far. Because as long as you don't speak up, as long as this outrage doesn't turn into real public pressure, the system will continue to function exactly as it was designed, transforming tragedies into spreadsheets, victims into forgotten statistics, and investors in valuable assets of a business model that simply cannot stop growing. The case of Michael Robinson is not an isolated incident, it's a pattern. And when you start pulling at this web, you realize that the entire system was designed to work exactly like this, transforming serious crimes into community intervention opportunities, keeping offenders on the streets under the guise of restorative justice, and most importantly, ensuring that the money never stops flowing to those who run this machine. Interface Children and Family Services is not just an NGO providing isolated services in Ventura County. It operates in at least 31 counties across California through its 211 system, handling over 250,000 calls annually. In other documents, that number rises to 40 counties. Regardless of the exact number, we are talking about a massive institutional presence spread throughout California with tentacles in virtually every area of the so-called social services sector, from mental health and trauma to domestic violence, human trafficking, homeless youth, and, of course, justice services and re-entry. They describe themselves as the only agency with a presence in every formally established facility under one roof in Ventura County. In other words, they are inside courthouses, schools, probation centers, police stations, and emergency shelters. There is no institutional space where Interface doesn't have some kind of program running. And each of these programs has a contract, a budget, a team, service, goals, and funding sources that need to be renewed year after year. Now comes the part that truly reveals the size of this network. Interface doesn't rely solely on local contracts with the county. They raise funds from multiple sources: federal funds from the OJGDP to prevent youth violence in schools, state grants from Proposition 47 for reentry programs, natural disaster relief funds through the CDB, GMIT Community Development Block Grant Mitigation, donations from the Conrad and Hilton Foundation for emergency shelters and at-risk youth, contracts with local schools, partnerships with municipal police, and donations from private companies. It's a fundraising machine operating in layers, diversifying funding sources so that no single disruption can bring down the entire operation. And there's more. Interface doesn't work alone. In several documents, it's described as an administrative agency or consortium coordinator responsible for managing entire networks of other smaller organizations that provide complementary services under the umbrella of larger contracts. In other words, when the county or state releases millions in funding for diversion or reentry programs, Interface is often the one distributing that money among local partners, maintaining administrative control, consolidating reports, presenting success metrics, and justifying continued funding. They are not just beneficiaries of the system. They are part of the infrastructure that sustains the system. When you understand this, it becomes clear why sentencing teenagers who have committed violent crimes to alternative programs is not a progressive moral choice. It is a systemic choice that fuels an entire industry. Each young person diverted from prison to a healing circle represents not just a second chance. It represents an added line on Interface's attendance spreadsheets, a renewed justification for requesting another one, 4 million next year, further evidence that the restorative justice model is working and deserves expansion. And the most sinister thing of all, Interface's own presentation document makes this transparent when it compares the cost of incarceration with the cost of investment per youth in their program. They sell this comparison as savings for the government, but in practice what they are doing is mapping exactly how much each offender diverted from the traditional system is worth. Approximately $1,000 per youth per year in the program versus $716 per day in the juvenile facility. It seems like a bargain, but it's a bargain that needs a constant supply of eligible youths to remain worthwhile. Now, consider the perverse logic behind this. If violent crimes begin to be punished with actual imprisonment, the number of young people eligible for deviance drops. If the number of participants in the programs drops, the success metrics plummet. If the metrics fall, it becomes more difficult to justify budgets of nearly $3 million in 2 years for just one county. If budgets shrink, dozens of jobs disappear, contracts are not renewed, entire teams of restorative justice experts become unemployed, and the whole narrative that alternatives to incarceration work loses political force. So the system feeds on itself. Progressive judges sentence violent criminals to lenient programs. Public prosecutors announce partnerships with NGOs to transform harm into healing. The NGOs present pretty reports showing low recidivism rates within the programs, even though many of the original crimes were never serious enough to generate violent recidivism anyway. Politicians celebrate reducing incarceration and cut ribbons inaugurating new community justice centers. And meanwhile, victims like Michael Robinson disappear from the headlines. Their stories are filed away, and no one counts how many Michael Robinsons are scattered around, forgotten, while their abusers have become balance sheet assets for organizations that rake in tens of millions a year across the state. The Conrad and Hilton Foundation funds Interface's emergency shelters and youth programs because it believes it is helping vulnerable young people. It probably is in some cases, but at the same time, this same institutional structure, this same organization that offers critical services to adolescents in crisis, also operates the other end of the system, the one that takes teenagers who have committed violent crimes and transforms them into participants in healing circles funded with millions of dollars of public money. It's the same entity playing both roles. And this creates a brutal incentive. The more young people in crisis or in conflict with the law there are, the more relevant and indispensable interface becomes to the entire institutional ecosystem of the county. They don't need the crimes to stop. They need the crimes to keep happening. But for the criminals to be classified as eligible for community intervention instead of being sent to state prisons, because if everyone is actually arrested, the money leaves Interface's budget and goes to the California Department of Corrections. And then the game is over. No more PowerPoint presentations asking for $1, $6 million. No more celebrations of innovative partnerships with the public prosecutor's office. No more fundraising galas with the Hilton Foundation applauding the unsung heroes of social justice. And when you realize that this doesn't just happen in Ventura County, that the same interface operates in dozens of counties in California, that there are hundreds of similar organizations scattered throughout the United States, all operating under the same model, raising public and private funds for alternatives to incarceration, all depending on a constant stream of eligible offenders, all justifying multi-million-dollar budgets based on metrics of service and reduction of incarceration, you finally understand that you're not looking at a case of isolated injustice. You're looking at an industry. And Michael Robinson, he was just the fuel this time. Tomorrow, it will be another. The day after tomorrow, yet another. And while the real victims accumulate invisible and forgotten, the machine continues to grow, requesting more funding, expanding to more counties, training more restorative circle facilitators, publishing more studies showing that the model works, and most importantly, ensuring that no one ever asks the obvious question that exposes everything. If the real goal was to protect victims, why was the entire system designed to benefit those who manage the abusers?